On to chapter 3, which is We Are the World. It's an aspirational song, and ultimately, it was a net benefit to the world, I guess. But it's a stupid earworm that sometimes gets stuck in my head at night. Will starts out this chapter by illustrating how small the actual world is by an anecdote of a vacation he took to British Columbia. It was cut short because there was a forest fire in Sweden. So, not only does smoke travel globally, but traces of our garbage can be found in the deepest ocean trenches and the ocean glaciers and the frozen glaciers of the Antarctic and the Himalayas. Will also talks about disease and how it spreads at the speed of standard travel. So the Black Death overtook Europe at roughly the same speed as horseback. And COVID-19, we experienced that. It infected the world at about the speed of a jet. The book delves into the speed of viral communications too by illustrating how fast Gangnam Style became the first video on YouTube to hit 1 billion views. In short, the world is connected as one system. Yet people are fixated on tribalism by way of nationalism.
Our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. And as long as we try, the more we're going to have war in this world. The judgment of God is upon us. Yes, sir. And we must either learn to live together as brothers, or we're all going to perish together as fools. Yes.
The book quotes Dr. King, but I figure I could do one better since it's available. I was about 2 months old when he spoke these words. He died about 6 months later. It's very similar to what I quoted from Benjamin Franklin last time. We must all hang together, or most assuredly we shall hang separately. The first subsection of this chapter is called Ground Control to Major Tom. Another earworm, but not quite as bad. Will talks about how we develop first. When we are born as a baby, we can't distinguish between, a baby can't distinguish itself between itself and its mother. Within a few months, it begins to understand not me, and it discovers him or herself by process of elimination. So there's not me, that must be me. This is best clinically stated as egocentric development. The same thing happens on the next step. There is us and not us or them. And that's how we as children learn, as well as how we as cultures learn. In the last chapter, we talked about the strict biology of us versus them, and this is the developmental descriptor. Inclusion philosophy suggests that we could make us bigger and idealism. And the idealism is there just in creating the infinite game. If you remember that from last time. The idea of the infinite game is to take a game, tweak the rules so that you can always play it and continue to play it. Well, inclusion philosophy suggests that us is bigger and the idealism is there. So humans are aspirational sometimes, and often our exalted texts espouse the possibility of universal usness. Many, if not of all, of the great prophets of the world's great religions present the idea of universal insight, transcending the tribe and the allegiance. We are the world. That speech from Dr. King is exactly that theme. He talks about, in that whole sermon, he talks about nonviolent opposition and that kind of thing, but ultimately he's talking about how it's us, it's us, it's us, it's we, it's we, it's we. And we are the world is exactly the same thing. We are the world, we are the children, we are the ones to make a brighter day. Like I said, it's an earworm, it gets stuck in your head. But us is only as big as our perception of them will allow. Our tribe can get big, but as it enlarges, the them becomes obscure. It becomes intangible. And our history seems to suggest that the us ends up folding in on itself and redefines us and not them. In other words, we can be aspirational to the idea of we are the world, right? But the more obscure the other is, if there is no them, then we as humans tend to fold in ourselves and create new thems. I think the gay community is a good model of this because, in 1969, 1970, it was queer people, whatever defines you as queer, and the rest of the world. And so we centered around one flag. Well, this year I watched a video where there's 90-something flags to identify all the various different specific things, the pansexuals and the trans women and the trans men and all of those things are viable. All of those things are fine. But there's a lot of little us's in there. And who is the them? Who is the them that they start to attack? And are they attacking within what was once just the queer community? So I'm just using that as an example. When the external threat goes away, the internal components find a way to create disagreements. This is really just another way to describe the fragility of reciprocity, cooperation. In our great religions, the prophets all taught universal inclusivity. But usually it's the followers who then reintroduce the concept of them. So it seems we're biologically and psychologically locked. If we need them to define us, we're limited on how unified we can become without help. I personally find it interesting that the US and other governments are admitting that UFOs exist and the like, and why aren't we more fascinated? Probably just because we distrust news outlets. Okay, so unless one of the aliens makes themselves known without a shadow of a doubt, it's unlikely that they'll become a global them, and frankly, that might be a bad idea for us all. But Wheel does talk a little bit about space. He talks about the 570 or so humans who have been to space. Many, if not all of them, report back their individual experience, how that individual experience humbled them and helped them individually see past their own nationalism and understand that we're all us against the vastness of space. Earth versus UFOs does work in the movies, and there are many movies in which the threat of alien encounter unifies the nations of the Earth quickly and efficiently. But that doesn't put us in the driver's seat at all. If we sit back and wait for the aliens to make the world, we are no better than the other doomsday preppers. We become science fiction religious zealots waiting for the external savior to come. What about the astronauts? Wheel says that all 570 humans in space had all transcended their belief systems. They experienced a more inclusive human tribe rather than the limited national tribes that they felt before. Of course, one could also point out that the people that have gone into space have pretty much been very educated. I suspect it's easier for a well-educated person to be able to comprehend the value of integrated worldview. In either case, it may be that seeing a live view of the Earth as a fragile blue ball in the vast darkness of space is transcendent. But ultimately, we can't all do that. That's not an option. Wheel then discusses an alternative to being in space, literally, and effectively compares the anecdotal evidence of astronauts with what he calls psychonauts, or those who use different hallucinogens to travel virtually. This is more or less the plot line of the movie and book Contact. Essentially, many who have tripped, especially on long trips, speak about us in the same way that the astronauts spoke of their experience in space. Tripping may not be exactly legal, but it sure is cheaper and exponentially easier. So This is a form of escapism, though, isn't it? In my opinion. It seems that to do the trick of encouraging participants to allow their thoughts to transcend tribal bounds, well, either that or it gives you another tribe to be from. It's hard for me to not be a little bit dismissive. I excluded some stuff that he talks about in this chapter, and in this section of the chapter. Will is conflating a lot of things back and forth, and one of them is finding ET is impossible if not. Will is conflating a lot of different things, and one of them is trying to find ET is hard, if not impossible, and suggests that perhaps the actual way to do that is to travel via ESP brought on by LSD. But how does that benefit anyone but the tripper? Even if it does work, let's say that I have one of those experiences and I communicate with a Klingon who's also tripping on some other form in some other corner of the psychoverse. Well, first of all, how would I know if that's a real thing or not? And perhaps my LSD Klingon is really just some incel from Mustang. And if it was 100% Will, how would that change anything but me? If one is having difficulty seeing themselves as an individual component of the world, I can see how the encouragement to explore the trip. Will hasn't yet talked about how to reestablish some meaning, and in my mind, it's hard to see how tripping is going to save the world. I mean, maybe he's going to suggest that we spike the water fountain in all the world's capitals or something, but that could go wrong. I didn't mention this before, but somehow I missed that. I didn't mention this before, but somehow I had missed that astronaut Chris Hadfield had covered Bowie's Space Odyssey from the ISS. It was interesting, but not really that relevant, so I didn't bring it up. But I would encourage you to look it up. I learned a new word on this part. You know, I often hear or see new words that I don't know, and now you can usually figure out what the word means out of context. I had a devil of a time with this one. Intertwingularity. I'd never seen this word, and I'm not sure I'm saying it correctly. This is a conceptual word coined to describe the complex interconnection or interrelation of human knowledge. If we just confine the experience from last year, the anomaly of 2020, we can see that information, misinformation, malinformation, the intentional profligation of misinformation by bad actors, combined with existential threats and news items that build anxiety, and then we feel compelled to consume the latest information. Our amygdalas shock us, full of adrenaline and dopamine, which makes us feel threatened, so we double down on collecting more information, looking for relief, but ultimately that can cause apophenia, or a tendency to perceive patterns where there is none. Apophenia is often reserved for early onset schizophrenia. Apophenia is often reserved for early onset schizophrenia, but it works for conspiracy theorists as well. Will goes on to talk about sci-fi movies here, one I totally disagreed with. He talked about how Star Wars was a hit a chord in 1977 as good guys against space Nazis. And he stated how the newer movies alienated the white guys that watched it originally, and that the rise in real-life fascism caused the movies to flop. Well, it would be hard to disagree on superficial levels here, but I think the reason, I think the reason that the movies flopped was because they didn't go through the exercise of having a coherent story, and Disney fucked up by making just Jedi's superheroes. But Will wants to think that the incels were angry that the new Luke was a girl and the hot pilots were Hispanic and black. Will also talks about The Matrix, which is easier to shoehorn into his thesis. One, because it's about existential transcendence, and therefore marries somewhat easily with wokeness, and with the psychedelics discussed earlier. The whole meme about the red pill versus blue pill and toxic reality of QAnon bullshit, As stated before, difficult times made worse by misinformation trigger us to look for more dangers, which allows our animal brains to sense connections that do not exist, and ready for red pill memes followed by lies made for a bad combo for the stupid. In the final section of this chapter, A Lion in Zion, Will talks again about the end times as experienced by evangelicals. It seems like this detail was touched on before, but in a nutshell, using several examples from Christianity and Islam on how the faithful are wanting to speed up the process to get to their fabled end times. Will reports back on the controversy of having an evangelical Baptist preacher from Texas dedicate the embassy in Jerusalem and the Twitter war that he had between him and Mitt Romney. As I think I stated before, the shrinking devout seem to think that they have agency in speeding up God's plan in the Middle East, which I would think is blasphemy, but goddamn, what do I know? Will also talks about ISIS and how they follow a doctrine that basically says that ISIS will initially fail when the armies of Rome somehow almost wipe out the armies of Islam, and then their savior will return and blah, blah, blah. Well, first of all, this explains some of ISIS's tactics. If the path to victory in your mind includes almost being wiped out, why not be reckless, right? The other little surprise, the savior that they are hoping for, well, that just happens to be Jesus too. The only real difference between ISIS and Christian evangelicals is which mass of religious people will suddenly change teams because even if they have the same quarterback, they can't be on the same team. The next chapter is Designing Meaning 3.0, and the last chapter of this section of the book. So far, this book has been about bad news after bad, coupled with information about how our prehistoric gray matter works, or more specifically, how we need to work against our nature a little bit. More or less, we are collectively fucked if we cannot figure out how to individually recognize that we are, in fact, one with the earth and all the 8 billion people who live on it, and the hundreds of billions of species of animals, for that matter. We must find a way to find harmony or perish. I was talking to Griffin earlier today, and he was having a hard time because of a day at work. And I wanted to say one specific thing. The opposite of love, the opposite of desire, is not hatred or anger, it's indifference. I think we would all be a lot more happy if instead of being angry and wanting revenge on those who have been selfish, if we're just indifferent to them, maybe that works better. I've said several times recently that I kind of don't care about the people who haven't gotten vaccinated, except for the people who can't get vaccinated for one reason or another, but I kind of don't care. If they've chosen not to get vaccinated, then I really die. I'm not angry about it. I'm just indifferent. I don't care. Last year I cared. Last year I was scared. Last year I thought about how this disease that we don't know what it is, it's killing people, and I hope it's not somebody I know, and I hope that it's not someone I care for, and I hope it's not somebody who's valuable. But now I just kind of don't care. And if we could all somehow figure out how to not care that Elon Musk has all of this fucking money, or that Harry and Meghan are having a hard time, or whatever it is, they're all going to get taken care of themselves. We don't have to care about them. We can be interested in their story because it's a fun little soap opera to watch. But the more we can be indifferent, the more we can just not care. Maybe that's the better thing. Disengage. If you're angry, disengage. If it's affecting you, disengage. Because you're not going to benefit anybody by hurting yourself, by hurting someone else or anything. By being angry, being angry feeds into meaning 2.0 for somebody else. Being angry and having your own ulcer. That's kind of how they win. Their riches mean nothing if nobody cared about it. If we were all just happy with the things that we have for ourselves, if there was no jealousy, then who would spend that much on a house? Why would you? Maybe if we started getting jealous of and expressing how jealous we are of Dolly Parton being able to throw so much money at Moderna for the virus last year. Maybe if that was the thing that we were jealous of, and if we expressed it as such, maybe then the rich people would turn around and they would start doing good things. You know, the We Are the World people, those guys didn't get paid anything individually. The main reason they did it is so that they could be, it was brought to them, the whole experience was brought to them as, you are one of the top singers in the world right now, and we want you to be a part. So, of course, it was stroking their ego, if nothing else. They didn't get anything else for it. All they got is a chance to sing in a great big room one line of an inane song that's the same words over and over and over and over again in their own style. And it was a top 10 hit for a long time, and they made a lot of money for starving children in Africa. Now, I don't know if something like that would work again or not, but that's the kind of thing that we need to focus on, is to not be angry at their wealth, because being angry at their wealth, that's feeding into the system. That's giving them power, because you are expending your energy on giving it to them. So the next chapter, like I said, is designing meaning 3.0. And I'll have that soon.